Welcome back. The Embassy of Nigeria to the United States will be hosting the U.S.-Nigeria Investment Summit 2018, where the Vice President Yemi Osinbajo is expected to give a keynote speech. The summit, scheduled to take place in Washington, D.C. on the 21st to 23rd of this month, has the theme, Nigeria is open for business, and will bring together public and private sector leaders from U.S. and Nigeria to explore commercial transactions. Now, joining me now from Washington, D.C. to talk more about this summit value proposition is an international trade and commercial policy consultant, Felix Obi. Hello, Felix. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much, Chimezie. Glad to be with you.
Sure. So tell me, what has informed this summit being hosted by the Nigerian Embassy in the U.S. at this time? What does the summit seek to achieve?
Frankly, this is the summit that good business sense requires. This summit proposes to bring together public and private sector leaders from Nigeria, put them in the same room with public and private sector leaders from the United States, and have them be able to transact a business, whether it is in infrastructure, whether it is in commerce, and all things Nigeria. We're the largest economy on the continent, and we have needs. The United States is the largest economy in the world and is looking for ways to invest. And of course, they now also realize there is competition, so it all works good.
Now, who are the targeted investors here?
Well, the critical sectors is agriculture, the critical sectors is infrastructure, the critical sectors are anywhere that the state governors think are priorities. I think the summit does not profess to be the authority in where capital should go. We hope that the state governors, the ministers, and the captains of Nigerian industry will drive the engagement. What the summit proposes to do is to provide an avenue and opportunity for the dialogue to happen. And then the needs, it will be needs-based in essence.
Now, do you think Nigerians in diaspora, including yourself, are convinced that Nigeria is truly ready and open for business, considering some of the economic bottlenecks we have right now?
Of course, we're doing this because there is a commitment to commercial engagement between the United States and Nigeria. We're also doing this because we believe that investing in Nigeria is good business. There are bottlenecks, as you mentioned, but those bottlenecks are also opportunities, right? Because once you get past those bottlenecks, you get into a market that has 190 million consumers. You get into a market where the rate of return is higher than anything one can expect in the West. But yes, there are challenges getting in, and there can be challenges navigating the system. But I think the return is well worth it.
So talking about the returns, the opportunities there, what key opportunities do you guys out there see here in Nigeria?
The key opportunities, as indeed the U.S.-Nigeria Commercial and Investment Dialogue, which the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Nigerian government negotiated quite a while ago, sees critical areas as infrastructure, critical areas as investments and in the investment sector, but critically also regulatory reform. As you know, the U.S. model is a market-based model. It's a little bit distinct from the Chinese model. It's private capital, and private capital requires a little bit of confidence in the regulatory framework to protect private sector investments. So there will be those conversations as well, and we're glad that regulators from the Nigerian government will be on board as well.
And what makes you think that the U.S. model that you talked about is better than the China's model that perhaps currently exists?
Well, you have to think about this, that the public finance systems in Nigeria is stressed, as is true for most African countries. And the Chinese model essentially is about making concession loans to national governments. The Chinese government does not necessarily require any kinds of regulatory reform. This would mean that the binding constraints to the economy that occasion these deficits in commerce, that occasion these deficits in infrastructure, are not necessarily addressed. And when you don't address them, there is there's an increased possibility that the projects will be successfully executed, but the commercial viability, the long-term commercial viability of the project will be called into question. And the beauty about the US system is that it would seek to address these binding constraints so you don't run the risk of white elephants. And we've had a few of those in the past. And that is because the structures that create efficiency, the structures that create good management are not necessarily always set up. We build the projects are built, but the structure is not, an enabling structure is not fully considered. And that's what the U.S. System would seek to redress.
Okay, so what key questions do you see the investors asking the Nigerian government officials that will be present at this summit?
The key questions is, how do we know that the regulatory framework that comes in today would be there 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Many of these projects have a rate of return that is amortized over decades, and there has to be confidence that in the system that the regulatory framework will not significantly be changed, that the regulatory framework will be based on market economics and therefore keep the projects commercially viable. I think that's top of the list. The other part of it also, and to be fair to the Nigerian government is doing quite a bit to make investors comfortable. There are economic zones that have tax rebate structures and tax forgiveness structures that attract investment, and it's left for the government to come make this strong case to investors.
All right, so is this like an annual summit or just a one-off event?
Oh, no, the expectation, and I've had conversations with the embassy, they expect that this will be an annual summit. The needs are huge in Nigeria, and the opportunities are great for investors, and it should actually be a biannual summit, if you ask me.
So, but it's just starting off. The one taking off this month is the first one.
Is the first of, and as you notice, the vice president of Simbajo has also announced the Nigerian National Economic Development Diplomacy Initiative, and this is really very similar to what the initiative proposes to address. It's using our diplomatic missions to drive commerce and engagement, and also bring in the diaspora community into dialogue.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Felix. I'm sure we would have more time in the future to talk more about this. Thank you for your time, Felix Obi. He is an international trade and commercial policy consultant. And finally, Kenya's economy will grow 5.5% this year compared with an estimated 4.8% last year, thanks to better weather and less political risk after last year's presidential election. That's according to the World Bank. A severe drought in the first quarter, political turmoil due to a disputed and then rerun presidential election, and sluggish private sector credit growth all helped cut 2017 economic output growth to the lowest in 5 years, from 5.8% the previous year. The Finance Ministry expects growth to rebound to 5.8% this year, but pressure to cut the government's fiscal deficit could cause it to scale back ambitious infrastructure projects, weighing economic output. But the World Bank says higher oil prices, reduced government investment in infrastructure, and still weak credit growth could curb some of the optimism. And that's it on today's show. Thank you very much for being part of it. I'm Chimezie Obi Iwagu.